Welcome to this Return to the Arts Alliance Mountain Empire Speaker Series. As we are still in the era of the coronavirus, we're going to be putting a lot of our material online as we can. And tonight we have the pleasure of an introduction to the Bernini exhibit at the William King Museum of Art in Abingdon, Virginia, by curator Katie Edwards. And we'll have slides available with this online, as well as the audio. Katie Edwards is curator of fine and decorative art at William King Museum of Art. She's originally from King, North Carolina, but has lived in Kingsport for many years. She studied art history and museum management at Salem College before pursuing her master's degree in curating at the Courtauld Institute of Art in London. While living in London, Edwards interned with the National Portrait Gallery as a curatorial assistant, curated a virtual exhibit of Dutch and Flemish paintings with a small team at the National Gallery, and was co-curator of an exhibition at Somerset House, one of London's top art destinations. Also during that time, Edwards' own artwork was featured on BBC when she digitally painted a portrait of actor Stephen Mangan. Edwards has previously worked in 2 galleries in Kingsport and has had her work shown in several galleries in Tennessee and North Carolina. In 2017, she completed her first cover for local author David Oakes' Force in the Mountains, and was recently published as an illustrator for her first children's book, D is for Darcy, Not Dyslexia, in November. Her current artistic obsessions include comic and narrative artwork, digital landscape design for virtual environments, and animation. Her art historical background includes pre-Columbian iconography, British landscape architecture, and medieval stained glass, while her curatorial research spans animation, British portraiture, and contemporary British artists. Since starting at William King, her research has covered topics from the history of fashion and Art Nouveau to the regional craft traditions of Northeast Tennessee and ephemeral objects surrounding birth and death. Her exhibitions include Head Over Heels, Tennessee Fancy, and A Painting Tradition. Her current exhibitions at William King are Will the Circle Be Unbroken? And the loaned exhibit Bernini and the Roman Baroque, masterpieces from the Palazzo Chigi, about which she is going to tell us tonight. Here is Katie Edwards.
Good evening, everyone. As Martin so kindly introduced me, my name is Katie Edwards, and I'm the curator of fine and decorative art here at William King. It is my absolute honor to welcome you all virtually to the museum, and especially to our exhibition of Roman Baroque masterpieces from the Palazzo Chigi. I am excited to share this exhibition with you all in more detail tonight, and I want to thank you for spending your evening with us. Before we dive in, it's important to mention that this exhibition has been made possible through the generous support from the community, including Rosemary Burris, John and Joan Gregory, and Don and Jenna Shaw. This show has also come to us through a series of unexpected opportunities relating to the pandemic. As silver linings go, we're very grateful that something as educational and moving as this exhibition has been able to come to Appalachia during the chaos of the pandemic. We have had the pleasure of working with the Palazzo Chigi and International Arts and Artists, who are the organizers of this show, and we've also had the support of Glocal on the Italian side. We are one of only 4 museums in the nation to be able to host this exhibition, and we're very proud to present it. The Grand Kiji Palace in Auricia sits a little ways outside of Rome and was once the summer home of one of the major Italian families. In the last decade of the 16th century, Cardinal Silvio Savelli enlarged the medieval castle at the site. The facade of the Kiji Palace today is due to the Savelli work during this time. By the mid-17th century, the property had been purchased by the Kiji family for its proximity to Castel Gandolfo and for its possible uses as a holiday home. In 1664, a major transformation took place. The architect Carlo Fontana implemented the redesign of the Kiji Palace with the help and ideas of Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Bernini was also managing the design and redevelopment of the entire urban center of Auricia. Agostino Chigi and his cousin Cardinal Flavio, who were both nephews of Pope Alexander VII, oversaw the project. Alexander also played a role in helping to design the layout of the main squares in Auricia. Bernini was able to plan the restoration of the sanctuary of Goloro before he temporarily left to design the facade of the Louvre in Paris for Louis XIV. The layout and design of the major structures in Auricia still bear the hand of Fontana and Bernini. The rooms of the Kiji Palace have remained relatively unchanged since Fontana and Bernini's involvement, owing in large part to the ownership of the palace by the Kiji family until the 20th century. It now houses a museum, space for concerts and cultural events, and town offices. Much of the original collection and furnishings remain, and the artwork has been added to through donations over the past few decades. It's now the premier museum for Roman Baroque art. The park at Auricia is also a result of redevelopment by Fontana and Bernini. Originally fenced in the 1500s, the park was dedicated to the goddess Diana. It was conceived as an area for hunting and prized for its natural beauty. When Fontana and Bernini began the redevelopment, they didn't eliminate the previous elements in the park, and the 16th century Savelli family changes are still visible, as are the ruins from the original castle on the site. The romanticism of the natural landscape is evident in the lasting changes made by the Baroque artists. They added grottos, fountains, and a courtyard. The park backs up directly to the Kiji Palace, which is perched above it on a steep hillside. During the 18th and 19th centuries, Auricia was a stop along the Grand Tour of Italy, and the park was opened by the Kiji princes to be toured by artists and writers from around the world. Camille Corot, William Turner, and Philip Hackert are among the artists that produced paintings of the park, and it was praised in the poems of Horace and Ovid. John Ruskin toured the park and referenced it in his writings about the connections between nature and art. The unification of art and nature, as well as between man and the environment, is vital to the messages of Baroque artists. The idealism of perfect harmony was not always supported by the Catholic Church, but as a backlash to the Protestant Reformation, a liminal space that linked the real with the divine was seen as an appropriate way to appeal to the masses. This painting, which you can see in the exhibition, is of Cardinal Flavio Kiji. He's responsible for the core of the collection that can be seen in Auricia today, and is also the prime figure in commissioning Fontana and Bernini for the redevelopment. The Kiji family was incredibly powerful during the 17th century, owing its influence to the family pope, Alexander VII, and also to its vast wealth. Alexander began his papacy with an anti-nepotism stance, but soon began giving jobs to his family. He famously said that the Pope does not have a family, to inform his own relatives that he would not be promoting them to various titles. He believed that he couldn't give anything to his relatives that belonged to someone else, like the church. When his sisters asked him for help in their dowries for marriage, he refused, and they were resigned to a monastic life after that. Of the 17 children that Alexander's father had, 13 of them became nuns. However, nepotism did eventually prevail. He appointed his brother Mario as the general of the Holy Roman Church, and this is also how his nephew Flavio assumed his position as the cardinal nephew, and how the administration was largely placed into the hands of the Kiji family. Alexander was interested in the idea of urban theater, and the notion that architecture, civic planning, and landscape could be designed to function as a stage or a grand setting, and this became one of the key factors of Baroque architecture. When Bernini was commissioned to create the colonnade in front of St. Peter's Basilica, it was to play into the idea that the Catholic Church was deserving of an imposing and monumental stage. Bernini's own words about the project were that the colonnade represented the Mother Church, embracing all Catholics to confirm their faith. The Kiji Palace is also home to one of the most extensive collections of period portraiture in the world. Many of the Kiji family women can be seen in the palace, and several of Pope Alexander's sisters have large portraits on display. Cardinal Flavio's personal apartments at the Kiji Palace featured portraits of family members, but also notably featured a room with women that he found were beautiful. His Room of Beauties, as it was known, had at least 27 portraits of women, which were commissioned to Ferdinand Voet in 1672. Flavio's personal interest in theater and drama also prompted him to create a small academy in Auricia that focused on Roman literature and theatrical texts. The portraits demonstrate a realistic, natural beauty, but also show off expensive fabrics, jewelry, and lace. The portraits in the Kiji Palace show off their wealth, but they also relate to the relevance of the family in both the religious and social spheres. The Kiji family's status made them great patrons for the art. And when Alexander VII decided that Bernini should be the one to transform the medieval Auricchia, it was in part due to his ability to create a feeling of total envelopment. Not only did Bernini have the lead role in the redevelopment of the palace, he also designed the Church of San Nicola, the gates leading into and out of Auricchia, the Sanctuary of Gloro, and the Assunta Church. He also did the civic plan for the roads leading to nearby Castel Gandolfo. Although Bernini worked for 7 different popes during his career, Alexander was by far his biggest supporter. He gave instructions for Bernini to transform Auricchia, much like he did St. Peter's Square, by creating a theatrical, monumental arrangement. In the Piazza di Corte, right outside of the Kiji Palace, the Assunta Church's round structure is embraced by 2 rectangular buildings that arc around behind. It's similar to Bernini's handling of the colonnade in Rome, where pilgrims were welcomed and embraced. Although the structures reach outward with architectural arms as if to hug those that come inside, people also could find them to be quite intimidating and imposing. Bernini's design for the Kiji Palace needed to reflect royal grandeur, and to do this, he merged the former castle with elements from a grand villa. The solid, imposing facade was preserved from the Palazzo Savelli, but the loggia and major additions on the sides were in line with Roman villas. The palace sits atop steep slopes that lead down into the park. The new architecture helped soften the transition so that it would appear that the palace had grown from the natural environment. Even the color of the palace was chosen to reflect the natural beauty surrounding it. Bernini's color of choice was a pale blue-gray that was referred to as being the color of air. Throughout the day, changes in light would change the color of the building, and whether it was being viewed from the square or from below in the park, it would look as if it were changing as a response to the natural environment. The Kiji family only used the building as a residence for a few months a year, but people who viewed it were treated to changes with the seasons as well. Bernini used this color on many of the buildings that he worked for in Auricchia and elsewhere, including the church across the square. All of the considerations that Bernini and the other artists at the time were taking into account when working on projects like Auricchia were related to a concept called the Bel Composto, or the beautiful whole, also known as the magnificent whole. The idea of the beautiful whole is represented well by Bernini, both on the outside and on the inside of the Kiji Palace. This concept states that all aspects of a space should be part of one total experience. The Bel Composto ideal was having a perfect synthesis of architecture, nature, painting, sculpture, decoration, and the divine. The goal was to convince or convert viewers to Catholicism by conveying a divine sense of unity. Bernini was an architect, a painter, a set designer, an actor, a writer, and a sculptor, among other talents, and his skills in so many areas made him the perfect person to work with a theatrical totalitarian style. And had he not been the lead figure of the Baroque movement, he may have been called a Renaissance man. For the Kiji family, he designed not only Auricchia and the family palace, but also created leather wall coverings, tapestries, paintings, and sculptures. You can see a bit of all of those in the exhibition. A leather wall hanging seen here is one of many that create a total wall covering in the bedroom at the Kiji Palace. Leather wall hangings were popular during the period, and places like the Villa Borghese also had rooms covered this way. In most places, these were destroyed or removed over time, or only exist in a partial manner, making the Kiji Palace one of the only places to see fully covered rooms today. The painted design is in great shape for a leather hanging from the 17th century. Bernini also designed a deep red tapestry to include elements from the Kiji coat of arms that was used as a wall hanging and as coverings for furniture in other rooms in the palace. Among the most spectacular pieces designed by Bernini for the Kiji family is a bronze ceiling lamp with putti, or cherubs holding a crown. The crown is gilded, and it features a star pattern that was used throughout the Kiji's properties. That star can also be seen on the gates leading out of Auricchia and on the exterior of the palace. Beyond the palace, Bernini worked on projects like this medallion that shows Pope Alexander VII and a church in Auricchia. Another gilded bronze example is also in this exhibition. This delicate adornment was designed by Bernini to be placed at the top of an elaborate carriage known as the Black Velvet Carriage. Two putti with flowing ribbons in gilded copper would have looked down at viewers from atop a carriage. During the 17th century, history paintings and sculptures were the prime means to convey moral messages. They often depicted religious or mythological scenes with allegorical subjects, but they could also be depictions of strictly historical events. As a part of the Bel Composto view, paintings like the ones seen in this exhibition served a purpose beyond beauty. They were useful tools to deliver the messages of the Catholic Church and to direct viewers to the divine. Images of saints, like this one of St. Lucy, were visual representations of whole biblical stories. Often identifiable through objects of their martyrdom, images like this could be used as parts of altars or places to pray, and they could also be found in the home to reflect specific morals or values of a family. Here, St. Lucy is seen holding her own eyes on a silver tray. You might also be familiar with the depictions of John the Baptist with his own head on the platter. In the story of Lucy, St. Agatha came to her in a dream and told her that because of her faith, her ailing mother would be healed. Her mother had previously arranged a marriage for her, but Lucy wanted to remain unmarried and give her dowry to the poor. When word got out that she was distributing her wealth, her betrothed betrayed her and left her to the local governor. When she refused to do as he asked, she was sentenced to a brothel, but she was unable to be moved, even by a team of oxen. She was surrounded then by firewood and set ablaze, but she wouldn't burn. A sword was finally thrust into her throat, killing her. Various accounts on how her eyes were lost persisted, from torture to her removing them herself to dissuade a persistent suitor. But in all of them, when her body was prepared for burial in the family tomb, her eyes had been miraculously restored. Her depiction of holding her own eyes signifies a devotion to her by viewers as the protector of sight. People would easily have recognized saints through their iconography, like this plate with the eyes. Every element in paintings was used to demonstrate the divine, from overtly religious themes to the powerful chiaroscuro or dramatic lighting that you can see. Each aspect of a painting emphasized divine order and unity. The lighting in these works shows that exaggerated contrast of dark and light. In scenes that include the infant Christ, light often seems to emanate from him. That can be seen in the nativity scene in the exhibition. It's notoriously difficult to photograph, so I will let you check that one out yourself. Works with a biblical nature could also be used to allude to human nature, though often in an idealistic way. This work, showing Lot and his daughters, is an example. The story is a troubling one, of the daughters giving Lot drink so that he does not know that they intend to sleep with him and become pregnant. Often during the period, works like this could be very suggestive. Artists masked their sexually charged works with biblical and moral allegories. When I've been giving tours of this exhibition, I've often been asked why there are so many mythological scenes. That should distract from the religious purpose, right? Well, yes and no. Just like us, people were not only interested in one thing. We can enjoy church and Harry Potter, right? Mythology was still an important aspect of culture, so artists and viewers alike wanted to experience it. To get around the non-religious themes, mythological paintings were allowed if they asserted good morals that aligned with Christianity. One such principle was imperative in Baroque art, and that was the idea of unity with nature. It was a glorification of bucolic life, lived simply and with harmony between man and nature. This work by Giuseppe Cesari shows Orpheus and Eurydice, and this is drawn from the utopian myth of Arcadia, where such a perfect harmony was possible. The Allegory of the Summer, seen here, is by Carlo Maratti and Mario de Fiori, and is one of the famous paintings in the series The Four Seasons. Mario de Fiori was the premier floral painter during the period. And this is part of a mixed genre that was formed between figure and still life painters. The collaboration was yet another way that unity was playing a role in the development of the Baroque style. The series was commissioned by Cardinal Flavio Chigi, and the mixed style can be seen in other works in the Kiji Palace. At the peak of the Baroque period, ornamental architecture, sumptuous patterns, gilding, sculptures, and painted ceilings all worked in tandem to transport viewers to a divine realm. The paintings during the height of this period also fueled that vision. Bernini's unique painting, the Sanguis Christi, is an example of this. Completed by Bernini and Borgognone, this painting shows the crucifixion of Christ with God, Mary Magdalene, and angels surrounding the cross. Its billowing clouds, dramatic lighting, and interesting poses typify the Bernini style that was adopted during the Baroque period, but it goes a step further, pushing a boundary between the real and the miraculous in a way that other artists never accomplished. The cross hovers above a sea of blood, which pours like ribbons of silk from the wounds. The strange composition was so moving and important that Bernini kept it in his own bedroom for the last 10 years of his life. Other artists would use some of the same imagery, but the majority of the works had at least a little grounding in realism. In these paintings, you can see human figures interacting with real environments. Above, there may be a host of angels and pillow-like clouds, but in Bernini's ultimate Baroque style, it was possible to have all figures suspended in a perfect divine world. Of course, that didn't stop artists from trying. And the fulfillment of a divine vision like this was not without its roots in financial gain. Families began to seek representation in artwork and commissioned it as a way to validate what they believed to be a divine right to wealth and status. They used biblical and mythological allegory to create a story in which they are the heroes or that signified their superior morality. This work depicts a man with a lion at his side, representing ambition. He kneels before Jupiter, holding a lightning bolt in his hand. The work represents a virtuous ambition, which was one of the core values associated with the Patrizzi house. Other families went as far as having their own likenesses substituted into biblical and mythological scenes. As a whole, the Baroque movement was marked by the input of the Church and its dominant power to control the content of the artwork being produced. The Protestant Reformation had prompted the Catholic Church to create a grander stage for itself. Artists looked to the Renaissance for inspiration about beauty and realism. But the classicism was ultimately eclipsed by the extravagance of the Baroque. That extra ornate aspect appealed greatly to the Catholic Church, and artists like Bernini were excellent at delivering on a full experience. Beginning right at the seat of power, the Baroque movement was immediately implemented in Rome with Pope Alexander, but Catholic rulers across Europe were also quick to adopt it. France, Spain, and Flanders all bought into the style. It's also during this time that Bernini took his trip to France to design the exterior of the Louvre for Louis XIV. The Baroque artists revived a style that had previously been banned for its glorification of the ideal, and asserted that it was actually better for worship because it was easier to understand and evoked a more emotional response from viewers than the duller, simpler work that came before. The Baroque style took off as a backlash to the Protestant movement, which emphasized a much less showy form of worship. The glory of the Catholic Church became the very backbone of the movement, and the religious architecture became increasingly elaborate as well. Large central domes became a key feature of the Baroque architecture, and it alluded to a space that existed between heaven and earth, much like the paintings that you can see in the exhibition. Adding to the impressive architecture, sculpture, gilding, mosaics, and ornamentation further express the sacred union of space. In this preparatory sketch for an illusionary dome, the artist is preparing to create the effects of a dome where one is not present. Likewise, at the Kiji Palace, the skies are painted on the ceilings, and any architectural details are omitted to evoke the sense that the room is open to the sky. This all ties back into the idea of the theatrical, which was fully realized during the Baroque period. Artists were attempting to represent a sacred, infinite space, and they used lighting and composition to accomplish this. The effects of lighting, both in the real space and in the invented space seen on canvas, were a core feature of the movement. Sculpture also undertook a massive transformation with the Baroque artists. Figures stretched outward in new poses and gained new importance. Large sculptures like this one of Apollo and Daphne by Bernini were sensual and dramatic. They could be viewed from nearly any angle, and they emphasized movement and space. Figures now reached out into space, blurring the line between art and reality. As it spread throughout Europe, the Baroque movement continued to inspire artists to utilize light in more dramatic ways than had been previously attempted. It also fueled a turn to the theatrical in work across the continent. Caravaggio's painting of Judith beheading Holofernes and Rembrandt's Archangel Raphael demonstrate how widely accepted the Baroque principles became. The way that all of the figures in the painting on the left are facing the viewer might seem unnatural, but it was important to orient the figures like they would be on a stage, so the audience could see the expressions and elaborate actions. The divine lighting plays a starring role in many of Rembrandt's paintings, but it can be felt very strongly in this one. All of the action is highlighted to instruct viewers on where to look, what is important, and to remind them of the divine. I've mentioned that the Baroque movement encapsulated architecture, sculpture, and painting, but it also influenced music of the time. You might be unsurprised to learn that Bach, Handel, and Vivaldi were all a part of this movement. The harpsichord gained popularity during the movement, and music developed a dramatic rise and fall, as well as a quicker tempo. Here you can listen to a couple minutes of a song. This is the prelude to Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, played in G by Miska Maisky. You can get a sense of the drama that was present in music just from this. From Rome, the Baroque style spread throughout Europe and even into the Americas. Following the realism of the Renaissance, the extravagant, ornamental qualities of Bernini and his contemporaries seems exceptionally theatrical, but that was ultimately the point. They turned their world into a stage for the divine, a spectacle for the masses that would usher them into the church. As dramatic as it appears, the goal was always to allude to a utopian-like harmony. When the Baroque transitioned to the French-driven Rococo period, which is sometimes referred to as late Baroque, that goal was lost, and architecture, artwork, and natural environments were severely altered to demonstrate man's power over the world. Fortunately, much of the work of these Baroque artists remains, and in places like the Kiji Palace, the results of the Bel Composto can still be felt in full effect. Thank you so much for joining us in this discussion of our wonderful exhibition, Bernini and the Roman Baroque, Masterpieces from the Palazzo Chigi. I hope that you'll all have a chance to explore the exhibition before it closes on January 16th.